In Greek mythology, the nymphs of the evening, Hesperides, were given the task of tending to a huge orchard that belonged to Hera, the wife of Zeus. It was called the Garden of Hesperides. It was special because it belonged to Hera, but also that it was located far west of Greek geography. Some say as far as Morocco. This made it exotic and unreachable. And also, there was this little thing about it bearing special fruit. Golden apples. Golden apples that were guarded by an immortal, never-sleeping, 100-headed dragon. So no one could steal them. As fascinating as Greek mythology is, it is also an important facet of shaping European thinking and culture. There is a theory among scholars about these golden apples actually being references to citrus fruit. Luscious oranges, tangerines, and yes, lemons. You might be thinking at this point, why are we talking about Greek mythology, gardens, and lemons? I'll tell you. It's because in this vlog, we are going to attempt to paint my very first proper still life and also talk a little bit about the importance of fruit in still life, especially focusing on lemons. I'm really excited to share this, but also really nervous about the attempt. So we'll see how this goes. I've never given much thought to still life growing up. The tiny encounters I've had with attempting still life have been in school or during the exams I had to give to get into architecture school. Personally, I have never enjoyed still life as an art style, to observe or to paint. I think it's because we live in a world of photography and it's almost diminishes the idea of a still life. Or that's what my thoughts are about the subject before I started this process. When you Google citrus still life, most of the images that load across your screen are lemons in Dutch still lifes from the 1600s. And when you start going down the rabbit hole, you quickly realize that the lemon as a subject for still life has remained relevant till now, despite it being made famous in still life by the Dutch almost half a millennia ago. But why lemons? Let's talk about it. Unsurprisingly, the word still life comes from the Dutch stilleven, which means objects that are lifeless or lack a soul. When you actually delve into the depths of still lifes, you realize quickly that there was more to them than just a hyper-realistic documentation of objects. These still lives were a reflection on the time and the knowledge they held of what people would consider food, what was expensive or exotic or unreachable to the common man. When you think about it, some of these people could only view these exorbitant items through masterpieces created in still life. It's like an accidental documentation and a window into the past with items that could not have stood the test of time, that were perishable. What I'm getting at is, in retrospect, there was a more significant point to them. But as you dig even deeper, you realize Each object placed on that table on a still life had a reason, a meaning, and a motive, a cipher to be read and interpreted. But back to lemons. For that story, we have to go back and travel to a different time period in history. We start our story with European history in the Middle Ages. We already talked about Greek mythology and the Garden of Hesperides in the beginning of the video. My mention of those golden apples. So yes, lemons, citrus fruit in general, was known to the Europeans as an exotic fruit that was cultivated in the far lands of Asia and Africa. There was an ongoing obsession with these fruits, to the point where merchants bought citrus bulbs and plantlings back from their travel, which were then meticulously grown in winter gardens and orangeries. These gardens became a symbol for the rich and important. If you have ever seen period dramas, you will notice them. I can certainly think of a few times I've noticed an orangery or two, but now I see them in a totally different light. Of course, citrus was available to consume, but one had to pay a small fortune to taste this delicacy. An average monthly salary for 4 pieces of orange. For someone who has citrus fruits growing in her own backyard, it's a bit difficult to comprehend giving away your monthly salary for 4 pieces of fruit. But in the minds of the 16th century European society, citrus fruit was a complex, difficult to produce and cultivate fruit that could only be harvested with patience and diligence. Something, if you think about it, could give significance and meaning, even curiosity, when you saw a lemon in a painting. A century or so later, we see the Dutch painting lemons in their famous still lifes. A trend that was the culmination of a few events, like the Dutch getting independence from Catholic Spain and the religious prosecution of Catholic art and ideals. The stripping of materialistic pursuits. There was also the rise of the mercantile trade as the Dutch East India Company rose to power. They traveled far and wide, establishing a prosperous web of trade and commerce. Trade and commerce that bought fruits, vegetables, and other worldly items at arm's length for the new wealth of the mercantile middle class. So, to summarize, no religious paintings were to be made, and the church was no longer the only patron for artists. The wealthy Dutch middle class were. And what did they want? They wanted to show their newfound wealth, but with the ideals of a Protestant, sobering upbringing. This flourished in the form of social setting paintings. These were paintings of Dutch middle-class life, scenes of the lady of the house offering tea, peeling apples, or even having a conversation with a potential suitor, or simply elaborate still lifes. But all these paintings, as you will see if you willingly want to go down this rabbit hole, will have the subtle indications of citrus in all of them. The citrus stones appeared in paintings to show wealth and prosperity in a subtle yet brilliant way to anyone who came to your house and looked at your commissioned paintings. Art was no longer only to be viewed in grand buildings or expensive lordly mansions. Artists were no longer dependent on patronage from the high and the mighty. You could buy paintings and prints of paintings that were mass produced. Interestingly, when lemons became a thing in Dutch painting history, we also see recorded the first market kiosk where you could buy a painting. Way before we thought flea markets were the best place to buy art, the Dutch did it. You also notice in most of the paintings, lemons were at the forefront in the composition of a Dutch still life, almost falling off the table, giving you, the viewer, an overwhelming sense of abundance and prosperity in the new Dutch Republic. The Dutch Golden Age was filled with things that did not belong there naturally. When you think about it, the Dutch observed these elaborate compositions of contrast and ciphers to eliminate their natural habitat of cold winters and dull light with the citrus colors. Brilliant yellows and vibrant oranges provided the play of light and color that could be observed vividly, even without candles or electricity. A visual delight that juxtaposed itself brilliantly from the beige monochrome of abstinence and ideology. But reading all this made me curious. It changed my perspective. You must have heard of the phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side. I grew up with tropical forests and fruits at my doorstep, and I bared hot, sunny and sweaty climate because I had no choice. What I yearned for was the magical winter, the winterland that I saw in movies and read in books. The snow-capped mountains, the crackling fireplaces, and the cozy jumpers. I'm assuming that's what the Dutch felt too. They wanted what they didn't have. And with their newfound wealth, it was convenient to have bread from Spain, porcelain from China, and spices from India at their doorstep. All present in a Dutch still life. Have a look, you will see them now. I suppose what I'm getting at is how still lives were a story that portrayed a paradoxical picture of movement in its stillness. When you look at a still life, you can perceive human innovation and impression. Not just look, but engage your mind and converse with the painting. And that was a beautiful cipher to decode. I'm sure my long-winded musings on this subject are going to help me create a better still life this time. But also, I'm never going to look at a still life the same again. Hope it does the same to you.